You're listening to an episode recorded during the time Innovation Fuel was part of University Canada West. We are proud and grateful for the work we've done together, and we want to thank the university for being in our podcast. We are now excited to continue the journey of Innovation Fuel into its next chapter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Innovation Fuel, business podcast by University Canada West,
bringing you fantastic stories for accomplished entrepreneurs and key industry professionals. Let's explore the entrepreneurial world through local businesses and our university community. Gelareh! I haven't seen you in a while. Hey, Gelareh, you know something I had the other day is I had some lamb.
Did you know Iranians eat lambs a lot? Lamb, then beef. But the problem is that we cannot find a lot of lamb in Vancouver. And our lambs are coming from Australia, but it's not from Canada. This is so strange, right? So do we have lamb at all in Canada?
Of course. And then it got me thinking about the world of agriculture in Canada and what is happening in the world of agriculture in Canada. What is out there? We know that the carbon footprint is a big thing, and we know that these types of sourcing beef and lamb are very heavy on the planet in carbon. But what are we doing in the world of technology to help in the sustainability as we access these types of meats?
Absolutely. I think that we have a guest that she can help us a lot about how tracing the impact of an environment and other data they can collect from live animals. So let's bring Corlena Patterson, CEO of PrüvIT Technologies, Executive Director of Canadian Sheep Federation, and leads the Agro-Ledger Development Team. Welcome, Corlena, and welcome, Dave, to another episode of Innovation Fuel.
Yes, welcome to another episode of Innovation Fuel, brought to you by University Canada West. We are here with Corlena Patterson. Corlena is going to tell us a little bit about her and maybe the world of farming and technology, and it might have some sustainability in there. We've got a lot to cover and unpack. Before we get there, Corlena, we've got to learn about who is Corlena. Tell us a little bit about you, Corlena.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Dave and Gelareh. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Who is Corlena? Not too complex. I worked in agriculture and agribusiness my entire life. I grew up on a farm and in a farming business. Yeah, so that's my passion, working with livestock. I have a bachelor's degree in animal science from McGill University and a master's degree in veterinary studies from the University of Edinburgh. And I work, as you mentioned, as the executive director of the Canadian Sheep Federation. We do all of the national policy, programs, and politics, that's my least favorite part, in representing Canada's sheep farmers and ranchers. And I think we'll dive a little deeper into my role at PrüvIT Technologies, which is actually a subsidiary of the Canadian Sheep Federation. And what we've done there is taken some of the tech tools that we built for our own producers and created a way by which we can sort of commercialize those outside of our own sector through PrüvIT Technologies. So in a nutshell, in 30 seconds or less, that's Corlena Patterson.
I love it. And coming from a farming background, because you come from a farming background, it's a family, you've been in the whole farming and mostly Canadian agriculture and that element, and then leading into PrüvIT Technologies. Tell us a little bit more about what PrüvIT Technologies is doing and what problem they're solving.
Yeah, for sure. So it started with the Canadian Sheep Federation. As I mentioned, we work on policy programs and others. And the programs part is related to livestock traceability. So we have a set of regulations in Canada requiring that we capture certain information about animals and where they move, and new regulations coming in another year that will sort of increase the amount of information that we collect about animals and their movements in an effort to protect our livestock populations should we have an incursion of a foreign animal disease. So that's traceability in a nutshell. And so the way it works in Canada is that the federal government sets the regulations, and then industry is responsible for ensuring everybody complies with that, but also supplying the tools with which our stakeholders can be compliant. So we knew that when these new regulations came in, it would be a lot more work, a lot more data that needs to be collected and managed and used properly and efficiently. And we were really concerned that the systems that we have had in place since I think the first ID programs came into regulation about 2004 were a bit outdated. We're not going to make sort of that workload easy or provide value back to the users. When you think about traceability, if we build systems that are just for the regulation, it's a lot like an insurance policy, and nobody likes those, right? So you pay for them all the time in case there's a wreck with your car or your house or your belongings, but you hope to never actually have to use them because you hope that you never get in a wreck. And that's a little bit like if we build systems for traceability for livestock that are just for the regulations. But we had all of our stakeholders saying, look, if we've got to do all this work, we want something back. That system has to pay back. So we knew that the systems that we had really didn't have that capacity. So we looked around, we explored different companies, what's happening in different countries to see what the options were. And there's nothing that really fulfilled all those requirements. Something that can meet a regulation, something that's easy to use, and something that can provide value back to its users. So I guess we decided, how hard can this be? As it turns out, a little harder than that comment, but let's build our own technology that fits our own needs. No disrespect to the ag tech innovators out there. As many new developments as we can make as possible is great. Sometimes there's too much of a disconnect between how agriculture works and how technologies are built with the thought that they will fit that need. So we just said, let's do it. And so we decided to build our own technology. And we figured if we're going to start fresh, we are going to try and capitalize on, emerging technologies. I don't think they're really emerging anymore, but we said, let's use blockchain. It builds trust across the supply chain, built-in algorithms that sort of ensure the validity of information. You can't change logs or reports in the system when you use blockchain. You can amend them, you can update them, but that full change becomes a transparent transaction. So that there's that, we call it building trust across the supply chain, just keeps everybody honest, if that's the reality of it, which is really important when the information that you're gathering is about, keeping populations safe. It also, though, supplies or provides an opportunity to start sort of getting that something out of that system, which is the ability to share information across that supply chain. And I think what's really missing from livestock traceability historically is ever looking at it like a supply chain, which really it is. And we've always thought it's very special, which it's not. It's just a supply chain. So we decided take blockchain for a spin in that sort of whole of industry supply chain setting, create honesty and trust, immutable records, and the ability to share information, not about people involved, but about the animals, about the production systems that they're raised in, the assurances that we've designed to make sure that they're well looked after. So our animal welfare programs, our on-farm food safety, which ensures, we don't have food safety issues with the animals that come out of those systems, and so on and so forth. I say to my colleagues in the livestock industry, we spend a lot of time, sitting around the table, holding hands and singing Kumbaya about what a good job we did of building, our food safety programs and our welfare programs and everything else. There's a whole, sustainability programs, climate change mitigation programs, but the message never gets out to our customer. So what we wanted to do is create a way that we can move that information with the animal, not only as it moves through the live animal supply chain, but then when it goes from being an animal to a product, being able to continue to track that valuable piece of information about how that animal was raised right out to the consumer. So that's what we decided to do. That's the system we set out to build. We started in about 2019. I think it's very successful. We are sort of in those final stages of getting it approved for use in that regulated space because it is a highly regulated environment that it has to work on, requires certain permissions. But we're pretty excited about sort of bringing that new technology into livestock production. And there's a lot of elements to that. So maybe we'll start with that. And then we built on some extra fun things that help with automated data collection, so that we can get data collected quickly and easily, omit data entry errors, file transfer errors. So, data integrity is essential. So we've started building some technologies around that. And so we did that for our own sector, and we did it because we couldn't find those technologies in the way that we needed them. And we realized, well, there must be a need elsewhere outside of our own sector for those. Creating PrüvIT Technologies provided us an opportunity then to work on, build functional derivatives or expand the functionality of those systems for other sectors outside of the Canadian Sheep Federation. Because we are a not-for-profit in that setting, we have to use Canadian producer dollars for Canadian activities, but this allows us to still sort of keep the ownership of the technology, but work on it outside of our own need.
Yes, exactly. That's you brought a lot of other questions that I have. It because we want to simplify it for our audience. What is your primary client? Who are they?
For our traceability technology, we essentially have two clients, or two sets of clients. One are the regulators. So they are the group for whom we are collecting the data and fulfillment of the regulation. And I mean, it's not just that. They use that information to track diseases if there's an outbreak. So they're one key customer. We need to collect the information that's critical to be effective in tracing disease and in a way that they can use it quickly and efficiently. Time is lives in the case of an animal disease outbreak, so that's critical. And then our other customer set really right now is our producers and our value chain. So those are all the people that at some point have care and custody of that animal through its life cycle. And they could be split up into a bunch of different groups, but let's lump them together as sort of one. So that's our users of our technology. Where can this fit? Outside of our own setting? And I think the answer is pretty expansive. It could work for somebody trying to build sort of an integrated supply chain tracking system for food products, right? So a way of that farm to fork traceability of a product so that whatever, specialty they're in terms of how that animal's or the food is produced or raised, they can connect directly with their customer. It also could fit as much as an entire country, aside from our own, that needs to bring in a traceability system that manages the whole industry for all those same purposes, for creating that transparency in the supply chain, collecting information about the animal, and rapidly responding to disease outbreaks. So quite a potential list of applications, sort of all around the same thing: food recalls, food safety, the speed at which diseases or outbreaks are managed is really what's key to what we do.
What is your pricing model? So about the producer will have to pay for using the apps or the software.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good point. And different countries do it differently. So if we look at this, like, how would this work in different countries? It really depends on how they've established sort of the roles and responsibilities in a trace system. In Canada, it is the producers who have to pay for it. It's not a pay per use, though, currently. Like, we already have regulations, and those system users already have obligations around capturing information and storing it. Right now, they store it on farm or on premises. With the new regulations, it will all go into the centralized database. So they're already paying that fee. We fix that fee, and I say we, not just the Canadian Sheep Federation, but all of the regulated species in Canada collect that fee from producers when they sell the tag that goes into that animal's ear that becomes the way that animal is tracked. And that's how those systems are currently paid for in the Canadian context. So remember earlier I said in Canada, the government sets the regulations, we deliver the system, and we have to pay for it. So that's one model. That's our Canadian model. The regulations allow whoever supplies that system to establish a fee to use that system on a cost recovery basis. Because in the Canadian setting, we also represent our producers, it's our goal to reduce those fees over time. That's why sort of owning the data has its advantages for us. Now, in other countries, they might do it differently. So if you wanted to do it in a country where the government pays for that, then the cost would be incurred by the government. If you wanted to do a supply chain, like a more integrated but smaller supply chain, it might be your processor, right? The person who's marketing that product, who wants to ensure that everybody who's supplying them is managing that information correctly, so they know if the animal was ever treated with antibiotics or if it's ever been vaccinated. That it was raised in a welfare system, that it was grazed on land that's part of a sustainability program. That would be something that, for example, the processing plant or the marketer might pay for, might acquire and supply to all of their suppliers to keep all of that information about the animals going through their system or the food going through their system in the same traceability system.
This is something that the regulator recommends.
Yeah, well, that's in the Canadian context. The way it works is the regulator requires that everybody who's involved in that animal's life cycle has to report to the system, and we've supplied the system. Now, we at the Canadian Sheep Federation, we represent all our sheep farmers and ranchers across the country. So it essentially gives those producers in Canada ownership over their own system and technology by building it ourselves, right? Making sure it's easy for them to use. It adapts to our production systems in Canada, and it gives them oversight over things like costs and how it's operated and what the future builds of that look like. We're different than a lot of ag tech companies, and it's very confusing for some. So that relationship, people wonder. PrüvIT Technologies is a subsidiary wholly owned by the Canadian Sheep Federation. So we're confident that when we supply the technology in our market, that it's built for purpose, right? It fits that precise need, and the producers sort of have that say and input to how it's delivered. But on the other hand, when we commercialize it outside of our own sector, PrüvIT Technologies would market its product to those potential clients, whether that's countries as a whole, or regulators in those in different countries, and or industry groups, depending on who's responsible in that jurisdiction for establishing systems. But similarly, we've had discussions with meat processors who want to create that integrated supply chain and capitalize on that blockchain value proposition in the trace system to ensure the validity of the information that's being gathered and shared. So it's kind of two hats, one paycheck. Don't do it, but
I mean, you keep saying that other countries. How many other countries are your client except Canada?
We have sort of a stepped approach to it, and we're unlike a startup in an ag tech startup in traditional terms, right? Where we build the product and then we go out and look for clients. Our first priority is to make it really work in the Canadian sector, and for the success of our producers, who are the ones that supported us building this technology. And it's once it's brought into that regulated space in Canada that we'll focus on moving it outside of those sectors. But we do know, working with our global partners in the sheep side of it, that there's just a large number of countries that already have either ID or traceability programs in place, but that are also looking to improve on those systems, right? From that food safety, animal health perspective. And we'll see an increasing number of countries needing to implement systems that manage their food supply chains as those EU regulations change around validating animals have never been treated with certain antimicrobial products, ensuring that animals have been raised in welfare systems, that they've not been raised on deforested land, et cetera, et cetera. So that list of assurances geared towards ultimately sustainability that the EU is putting in place is going to drive increasingly the need for countries or supply chains to do a better job of managing the information about the food that they're producing, whether that's livestock, coffee. I sit on a global group that talks about designing systems that will ensure that exporters to the EU can meet those requirements. So coffee is critically important to me. It's what keeps me going right through till about 5:59 p.m. where you are. So coffee and cocoa and cotton and wool and meat and vegetables and fruit. So as those EU regulations change and require that importers or exporters into the EU demonstrate that they've met those criteria around sustainability, we're going to see an increasing need for systems like this, whole of supply chain systems that can collate the collective of that information through that foods production system. So, and for animals, that could be when they're raised, it could be when they're in a feedlot, it could be when they're processed, all those areas in between of that production system. So I think I know we'll see an increasing demand for more fulsome trace systems to meet those requirements.
Corlena, you have two types of software that are implemented into the PrüvIT Technologies. One is the FACEIT, and the other one is the AgriLedger. The AgriLedger you're talking about is more around the blockchain and the collection of that element. The FACEIT is more about using technology to recognize, example, sheep and the identity of that sheep in a pasture.
That's right. Yeah. So our flagship sort of technology was that AgriLedger. So it's that traceability system that collects data and analyzes it. So we didn't stop at just gathering the information for a regulation. We worked with some academic institutions to build analytics packages into those so that if you had a disease outbreak something that currently would take, regulators or industry 10 days or 2 weeks to sort of track where all the risk is. Where are those exposed animals now? What premises were they on? What trucks did they move on? Our system can do that in 30 seconds or less because we've built in a data analytics packages based on those. That's the flagship. And really, in my personal opinion, the key to an effective trace system is that underpinning technology. And then from that, you focus on how you identify whether it's places, vehicles, or animals that are part of these sort of events in an animal's life cycle that need to be tracked. So in Canada, we use RFID tags. A lot of countries do, and a lot of countries are bringing them in, and they can be handy in many ways, but they still are cumbersome in the applications that we have. So one of the reasons we wanted to work on like biometric assessment, so in other words, facial recognition, which is our PrüvIT, uses camera vision and AI to uniquely identify animals based on their face, just like your phone does for you when you try to open it, was because we wanted to we wanted to cut down on the time and work it takes to collect the information and put it into that system, right? The system's works. It's user-friendly, it's efficient, has lots of, things that make it easier to use, but collecting the data still takes work. And farmers don't always have time when they're in the midst of an event. So think handling sheep, right? If you've never handled them, and I took our PrüvIT team out to a farm and we had them catch sheep so that they understand that sheep always think you're trying to kill them all the time, right? So now envision that you're trying to put 400 animals that think you're trying to kill them onto a trailer that they've never been on before because you've got to move them. But while you're doing that, you have to capture the unique ID on each of those animals, which is a tiny little tag that folds over the ear. So only half of the number you can see and the other half is underneath the ear, probably as they're running over top of you to get into that trailer. And that's difficult. And if you have to slow down that process of getting them on the trailer to collect that data, people will hate a traceability system. And we don't want that. We don't want it for a bunch of reasons. One, we want people to be compliant, not just because it's a regulation, but by collecting good data in a timely fashion means that if we have an outbreak and that trailer of animals is involved, we can very accurately pinpoint where the issue is, or a food recall, right? Not just an outbreak, but a food recall, a food crisis, or an emergency of any type. We can be effective in gathering it. So we said, well, RFID is good, but what else is there out there that's accessible, that everybody has? Well, who doesn't have a cell phone? Pretty much everybody does. So we designed a facial recognition technology that can just capture an animal's face from different angles as they're moving using a networked device, not an expensive on-farm GPU that you have to put cameras every 10 feet. And that was the tricky part, was making it sort of mobile, if you will, and accessible. So that as they're running by you or over top of you at 100 miles an hour, thinking you're trying to kill them as they're going on the trailer, that technology can capture the faces. And the beauty of that is generally those devices will also date stamp, time stamp, and geolocate where the event has happened. That's all of your information. So now you've collected the data and it's gone directly into the system as the event is happening, but without extra work to do it. So that was the goal of our PrüvIT technology.
But it's also interesting because you're probably reducing the margin of error by huge, because human element and human, we make mistakes as humans, but if you're leveraging that technology to reduce that element and not being able to read those numbers, exciting.
Well, and that was the goal, right? So well, first of all, when you suggest let's build facial recognition for sheep, and you suggest it to a board of directors made up of sheep farmers, they might look at you like you have three heads. But we were really fortunate to have a group of board members who were like, well, you haven't steered us wrong yet, so let's give it a try and see. And it turned out to be, far more successful than we thought. But you're right, that was the goal. The goal was not to be as far out. I did have a government person say, Corlena, why do you have to go find the hardest solution? I was like, really? I thought it was the easiest solution to not having to handle extra things. It's not, the goal was not to go far out. The goal was to make sure the data is good and it's immediate and it doesn't take extra work for people to accomplish.
I want to think about what the future is here, because you've got pretty neat technology, face recognition, and this blockchain ledger element in the agri ledger. But what could be the future? Could it be preventative? Meaning preventative, like could we see, for an example, the avian bird flu is a big challenge for a lot of farmers that go out there and not recognizing it fast enough, they lose a lot of their resources. So could this technology be advanced into recognizing certain things really quickly to save some of these animals?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because this is my favorite next thing that I'm going to have to look for permission to explore. I do think biometric assessment. So we're not the only group that's working on ways of using camera vision to sort of assess things. It's happening for different species. They have it for pairing. Are lambs close to the ewes for this period of time? Therefore, they must belong to it, and you can do that sort of in camera vision. You have applications for dairy cattle that do gait analysis to see if the animal is walking properly or not. And there's lots of versions of them, and I think they're great. I also think they're just a stepping stone, in my personal opinion. And by the time we get those perfected, we should be past using them anyway. What's really exciting for me to look at is sensor technology, and not wearable sensors, but I'm waiting for somebody to find me a biodegradable nanosensor that we can actually put in animals. And biodegradable because you don't want to be putting things into animals that A, create a pain problem, but also B, have a residual food safety concern by a piece of metal in the meat. And that's not a far-fetched theory, right? They make sensors for brains, human brains, in brain injuries that are biodegradable, and they'll measure pressure as it builds in the brain. And then that sensor will signal that there is an increasing pressure in the brain before it becomes so much pressure that you have a health issue related to it, right? So for me, that, and to your point, absolutely. Right now, when we assess biometrics, so our PrüvIT technology does facial recognition, but it also measures the change in an animal's physiological expression as an indicator of welfare and pain. So those facial changes as they experience pain are measured, and they become an indicator of welfare. But that and all these other biometric assessments are waiting for that physiological expression of an issue, which generally lags fairly significantly past when they either become infected with a disease or a virus or an ailment. And so we are being much more reactive than we are proactive. And you hit the right words, because those are exactly my thoughts. So if you had nanosensors in animals that could detect white blood cell counts, viral loads, body temperature increases, cortisol levels, which are the standard indicator of welfare, then you could much sooner and automatically detect these issues and be far more proactive. And what's even cooler is that you could actually take a group of sheep grazing on the open prairies out west and have sensors in all of them, but have one or two sentinel animals in that field who are collecting the data from the sensors through a receiver in an ear tag that's got a solar panel on it that is sending that signal to a satellite. And you can collect all of the data from those animals without being anywhere close to them in real time as they're eating. And I think that is really sort of that next thing that I can't wait to explore. Now, I do have a student who's interested. We've capitalized on really brilliant students through all of our technology developments. They're hungry and they are bright. Like if I need my cell phone fixed, I go to my teenager, right? So if I want technology built, I go to those kids who are in school who thinks hackathons are fun and they do them, just for kicks. Anyway, so I've got a young student who is in bioengineering, and she has to, in her fourth year, do a project. And she's like, I will make you a biodegradable nanosensor. And I'm like, sold, because I have everything else. I have the receivers, I have the tags, I have the satellite system that we can tap into. Just need the biosensor. So if anybody out there is listening, then let me know if you have one.
Well, Corlena, you said it perfectly. This is the perfect opportunity to make the segue into, before we wrap up our show, do you have a challenge to throw out to our listeners out there? Maybe this is it. So please.
So that would be the challenge, is what is that next best thing? The challenge is to think of it in terms of what fits the problem. So I think of a key priority, at least for me, is animal health. And we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but when we talk about sustainability and food supply sustainability, we think about soil carbon and plants and methane. What we often ignore or overlook, I don't think we ignore it. I think it's that people don't try to find how it incorporates. But healthier animals produce more food with a smaller impact on the environment. So animal health should be one of those key pieces of the conversation around food production sustainability, and it far too frequently or infrequently is. So the challenge is find a way to keep them healthy that's not invasive, doesn't interfere with welfare, and the data can be collected autonomously without people having to stand there over top of them. And that's the challenge. Or biodegradable nanosensors. Like if you want to just dig down to the minute piece of it, find me one. I don't think I can find one in early days that can do all of those parameters. Let's just start with one. Measure cortisol for me. I'd be happy. Or, white blood cell count. Start there and build those technologies over time.
Love it, Corlena. The conversation's been amazing. It's actually opened my mind. I think we're going to have to get you back again. We're going to need to talk about ethics and sustainability because we just didn't get there. But it's been a great episode today. Thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Corlena. Thank you, Dave. That was another episode of Innovation Fuel.
Thank you for listening to Innovation Fuel. We are on all podcast streaming platforms, Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Visit our website at www.upenwest.ca/Innovation Fuel. Also, follow us on Instagram at innovation_fuel.